Welcome, everyone. I'm Ashish Kaushal, co-founder of Consciously Unbiased, an organization that drives inclusion in the workplace, and CEO of Hire Talent, a staffing firm. Thanks, everyone, for joining us. We have a really special LinkedIn Live for you today. We're doing something a little different. We're going to start off the show by showing you a trailer for the feature film Lilly that's coming out in May. It tells the story of Lilly Ledbetter, the fair pay icon and namesake of the Lilly Ledbetter Fair Pay Act. Now let's watch the trailer.
Sometimes in life you hit a turning point.
Lilly! You gotta be more careful, girl.
And that was it for me.
How long have you worked there?
Just shy of 20 years.
I don't understand why you stayed.
At first, they were just shenanigans. I got it. Schoolboy nonsense, really.
If you can find me some evidence, I need substantiation to build you a case. Well, here we go.
You sure you're up for this?
What time you want to leave?
Now, your income, if you include overtime, it is half of what the men are making.
She was bossy, thought she was better than everybody else.
John wants me to smile more.
Don't you dare smile.
These are powerful groups. We knew that it could go either way.
You think they should get away with how they treated me?
No. The partners and I would like to take this to the Supreme Court.
That company took advantage of me, like so many companies are taking advantage of their workers.
If she wins, women all over the country are going to use this as an excuse to sue.
I'm so damn proud of you, babe.
Miss Ledbetter was consigned to a career as a second-class employee only because she is a woman. That cannot be the law, and it isn't.
You knew you were being paid less than your male counterparts. You waited to retire before suing.
Do you really believe I chose to work 20 years knowing I was being cheated and discriminated against just so I could wait to sue? Does that make any sense?
You're not one of them, and you never will be. You're a country girl who grew up swimming in Doc Brewster's pond.
That's right. So I know how to burn off a leech.
Wow, that was powerful. I'm excited to watch this when it comes out. We have film creators here with us today to share more about the story, more about her story. Lilly Ledbetter is an example of how an ordinary person can do extraordinary things and make a big impact. Ledbetter passed away last year at 86 years old. In honor of her legacy, we're having a conversation today on Equal Pay Day, which signifies how far into the new year an average woman must work to be paid what the average white man was paid the previous year. Our producer, Lila, will drop some links in the comments if you want to see this year's stats. Lilly, the film tells you common sense should be that people who do the same work should be paid the same way. It also clearly shows how having the right community around you is what drives change. Many people in organizations such as National Women's Law Center and AAUW stood behind Lilly to change the legislation, and we'll learn more about this today. Conversations such as the ones we're having today are important because conversations lead to cultural impact. Cultural change leads to policy change. So let's introduce our amazing guests who are here today to talk about the legacy Lilly left behind and how each of us can play a role in creating impact. Rachel Feldman, director of, co-writer and producer of Lilly Film. Jyoti Sarda, producer of the Lilly Film. Andrea Johnson, senior director of state policy and strategy, National Women's Law Center. Galen Burrows, vice president of education and workplace justice, National Women's Law Center. And Gloria Blackwell, CEO of AAUW. Welcome, everyone.
Thank you.
Hello.
So start out with each of you sharing a personal memory of Lilly, and what was it about Lilly that made you think she made such a big advocate? Rachel, would you like to start?
I'd be delighted to. Thank you so much for having us, and thank you for showing the trailer. This audience are the very first people who are seeing them. I first saw Lilly speak, like most people, on television at the 2008 Democratic National Convention, and I was starstruck by her. I did not know who she was at that moment, I'm embarrassed to say, but There was something about Lily, there was something about the way she presented the information, her confidence, and the fact that this Alabama grandma was talking about fair pay in front of millions of Americans. And I just, as a storyteller, it's my job to know a good story when I hear one. And I reached out to her the very next day. I had a sense that this could be, an Erin Brockovich, Silkwood, Norma Ray kind of a movie, the kind of movies we love. And I reached out to her, and she told me about how much she loved movies and how important movies had been to her in her life. And she got behind the idea of me and making this film from the very beginning. She was an extraordinary, extraordinary woman.
Love that. And Gloria?
Sure. Thanks also for having me to talk about this important movie. Lily has been a part of AAUW's story and honestly just a part of AAUW's heart, for more than a decade. And I certainly have always admired her strength. At the time of the legislation and beforehand, we had an incredible policy team here at AAUW leading up to the legislation, and afterwards they did such a fantastic job of supporting her, partnering and leading the change. And our members admired her not just because she was such a fierce advocate, right, but for her courage and also for just being real. I remember meeting her, and she had this sort of no-nonsense charm that really did make you stop and listen. Whether she was on stage at our 2009 convention, which was the first time that I met her in St. Louis, or whether she was addressing our college student leaders in Alabama, or walking the halls of Congress with AAUW 10 years later, marking the anniversary of her historic bill. And when I met her, I just remember hearing that powerful story and all of the advocacy that she did, in partnership with AAUW. And when she spoke, she ended her speech saying that she was a fighter, but that fighting can be tiring. And it's the support of our communities that gives us the strength to keep on going, to keep on fighting. And those words really do remain true. And that's a memory that I hold dear of her.
Amazing. And Andrea?
Yeah, I just wanted to say that trailer gave me goosebumps, and I'm holding tears back. So it was really powerful and really moving to hear the Alabama drawl that was so much Lily's drawl. But I got to meet Lily in the first time in 2016 when not long after I started at the National Women's Law Center. So this was post the Lilly Ledbetter Fair Pay Act passing, which the Law Center was very involved in helping her get that through Congress. But I got to see her a few years later when I was in a minivan, picked her up at the airport with another Law Center staffer to drive her from Baltimore to Dover, Delaware, to go and speak at an equal pay rally. And I don't know if anybody's done that drive before, but it's like the longest, straightest road that just goes on for hours. And I got to sit kind of like a little kid in the back of this minivan, straining to listen to everything that Lily was saying, because I too was starstruck. And I had read about her case in law school and just the immense injustice she had experienced. And then the legislative fix. And it was just, she's an equal pay icon. And it was so exciting to meet her. And I was so nervous, but she was so normal. I was, sitting in the back seat trying to act cool and ask her all these questions, but it didn't matter what I looked like. She was so normal. And we quickly realized we had a lot in common. We were both only children. We both weren't so great at cooking. And, she was like me. She was like all of us. And I think that's what made her really powerful. She was just so easy to talk to, so unpretentious. And really, something horrible had happened to her, and she didn't want that to happen to anybody else, and was going to do everything that she could to stop it. And so I had the privilege of working about 8 years with her to go state by state to try to close the wage gap. And she would drop everything to call a state legislator, to call another advocate. Whoever needed to be talked to, she would talk to them to let them know her story and how the state had the chance to fix it so it wouldn't happen to anybody else. And we kind of crisscrossed the country together, and I deeply miss the conversations with her. We would have 30-minute calls to work on an op-ed together, and it would turn into 2-hour conversations, just catching up on everything and reliving her story again. She just really wanted to make change, and I miss her deeply.
Yeah. I loved the line where she talked the leech line because it shows one, her strength, and number two, never really thought about being fair. And if you're not fair, then you're basically leeching off someone else, and that was a really powerful statement there. Jyoti?
Yes, thanks. And also, I'm really happy to be here. It's interesting hearing Andrea's reflections because that's where my memory of Lilly almost picks up, because I didn't know much about her until I met Rachel and learned of the story that she wanted to bring to life. And I will say that I felt like I could see myself in Lilly, or at least the me that I aspired to be, even though our circumstances couldn't be more different. And I feel like she had that impact on many people. So a lot of my interactions with Lilly had to do with various Zooms or things that we would have her tape for us to help us put the movie together. And she was always best when she spoke in her own words. She was not a scripted person. And so we were struggling over something we'd written for her, and then we sort of went off screen, and she started almost immediately talking about state by state play on what the status of equal pay was, with amazing precision and clarity. And this was only a little more than a year ago. And so secondly, I wanted to say that I also aspire to be as sharp and as present as she was up until the very end.
Wow. Galen?
So there are a lot of themes here that I'm just going to reiterate. Lilly was always authentically herself. I mean, she never set out to be an icon, even though she became one. She was a worker from modest means from Alabama who was wronged and who was robbed of redress. And she told that story with such clarity, in a way that it could connect with the experiences of so many people. Like this idea that you've worked hard to make sure that your family had a better life than you did growing up, like for your kids, right? That's something that resonates really deeply with a lot of people, that you achieved success only to have someone mistreat you or take advantage of you because of who you are. That definitely resonates with a lot of people. You don't have to be a grandmother from Alabama to see yourself or see some part of yourself in that story. And that's what made her such an effective advocate. She was a brilliant storyteller. And storytelling is really hard. Our filmmakers know that. Storytelling is really hard, and it takes a lot of courage. And oftentimes we hesitate to tell our own stories because we know that sometimes your stories can be used against you. And Lilly knew that too. But she really leaned in to the power of using your story to make change. She didn't let it go. She told her story everywhere she went, to as many people as she could on the road. And by doing that, she invited other people to tell their stories too. And that's what sort of built the momentum, right? And you wanted to fight alongside of Lilly. So for me, I agree with what everyone has said, being starstruck, seeing Lilly speak and, being taken in by her story. But that was her gift. And that is why she was able to be so effective.
Yeah, it's definitely the charisma and the strength, right, together. Rachel, what inspired you to make the Lilly film, and what was your personal connection to Lilly and to the cause?
Well, thank you, everybody. Those were wonderful stories. My personal connection comes a little bit from my own upbringing. I'm a second-generation American. My grandparents came to America without means or language, and yet they were immediately involved in the labor movement. And so I come out of a tradition of working for society, working for the good of others. And in my own personal experience as a filmmaker, I experienced a tremendous amount of gender exclusion and discrimination in my own career in Hollywood. I used to say to Lilly, you can be a Hollywood film director or an Alabama tire factory worker and every other woman around in the entire world, but discrimination is the same everywhere. And I felt it in my bones then which activated me to become an outspoken activist for women behind the camera in Hollywood and gender equity across the board throughout the world. And so when I heard this woman again speaking about this issue and that she was the voice, the face of someone who was representing this very important issue for all of us, I had to reach out to her and I had to tell that story because I did have a personal connection. I did have a legacy connection. And I also felt that her story was yes, unique to her, but universal, and not just to women, to workers and to anyone who's been discriminated for whatever reason or othered for whatever reason around the world. I felt that her story could be a representation, not just about gender equity or fair pay, but about justice for all and how an ordinary person can make an extraordinary difference by speaking up.
Wow, amazing. And why do you all think Lilly's story resonated with so many people from so many different backgrounds?
Is that to me?
Anyone who wants to answer that.
Well, again, I think that story is universal. I think so many of us have been obstructed, discriminated against, in so many aspects of not only our work life and our personal lives, othered, that her story opens up all of those stories for everyone. And I think it touches people's hearts in that way. The other thing I think I'll just say is what was so beautiful about Lilly is she reached these organizations, the AAUW, the National Women's Law Center, the ACLU, there were so many organizations. Once Lilly got to a certain point, it became a community of women and organizations who lifted her. And in order to make change, even in my own film experience, Jyoti's a perfect example. Like, I have this amazing team behind me and the movie that are bringing it out. We have to work in community. And that's a beautiful thing about activism.
Yeah. Rachel, did Lilly get to see the film before she passed?
Yes, she did. She did. And she loved it. She just loved it. I have to tell a nice little anecdote. I had taken an earlier cut down to Birmingham, Alabama to show Lilly and her friends and family. I rented a cinema and we all had popcorn and it was very exciting. She liked the film very much, but she came over to me and she said, I like the film a lot, but there's not enough ballroom dancing in it. And I don't know if you know this about her, but Lilly was a ballroom dancer, and she danced with President Obama at one of the inaugural balls. And so I went back to the editing room, and we recut the film, and we put more editing back in. And she was very, very delighted. As I said earlier, she was really a movie lover. She understood the power of storytelling. She understood that you can make social change by touching people's hearts. And as a storyteller, that's what we do. I think, Galen, you said that earlier. When you touch people's hearts, you touch their heads. And even though you're telling an entertaining movie, which I hope Lilly is, I call it a roller coaster ride of suspense, euphoria, and heartbreak. And I do. It's a very emotional movie. But when you walk out of that theater with tears in your eyes, you are thinking, whether you know it or not unconsciously, about what happened to this woman and how it's unfair. And we cannot allow that to happen to other people.
No, absolutely. Andrea, Lilly's story is really about pay transparency story. Can you share a backstory on how Lilly got tipped off after nearly 20 years of not being paid less than her male counterparts?
Yeah, I think that's something that is not always kind of that story that's always told about how one of the major injustices that Lilly suffered is the injustice that so many people still suffer of pay secrecy, that her employers were kind of able to pull it over her head that for nearly 20 years that she was being paid so much less than her male counterparts. And the reason she didn't challenge the pay discrimination for those nearly 2 decades was because of that secrecy. And for those who are deep into the case and the legislation that happened afterwards, that was really focused on the statute of limitations and making sure that every time you receive a discriminatory paycheck, that clock starts over for being able to challenge that discriminatory paycheck. Because initially the Supreme Court said it has to be your first paycheck. Right after the discriminatory decision was made, that is the one that starts the clock, which is just ridiculous. That was fixed. But really what was at the root of the problem was this secrecy that first allowed the employer to set her pay unfairly to begin with, because nobody was able to hold them accountable. So it allowed discrimination to seep in there, and then made it so that for 20 years it went unchecked, which, to the previous question about why Lilly's story resonates with so many people, it was very much it was interesting to see how kind of the generations of folks that really saw themselves in her story, because it impacted her as a parent, raising kids, her ability to save for college for her kids, to take family vacations. It impacted her retirement, and still was up until the very end impacting her retirement and her ability to make ends meet. So those 20 years of being paid unfairly, that impacted the whole spectrum of life. I think people really see that themselves in that. But yes, the pay secrecy that happened is a massive thing that Lilly was really trying to, over the last 8-10 years, focus on, how that hurt her so deeply, and how things weren't going to change. We can change the statute of limitations laws. That's an important piece, but ultimately we're not going to see the wage gap close if we don't bring more transparency to pay.
Is the law still in place where the statute of limitations, if you're not aware of you're being hustled?
Yeah, that is still the law in the place. And it's always interesting when I go around talking to legislators across the states. Lilly is such a big icon in this space that there's an assumption that law fixed everything, actually, and that it did far more than it actually does. It did a really important thing, but it did not close all of the loopholes in the Equal Pay Act, and it doesn't directly address pay transparency. So now we're working state by state to try to get stronger pay transparency laws in the books. And Lilly played a really important role in changing the conversation around pay transparency. It was interesting, when I first met her back in 2016, our conversation on this issue was really about, please, employers, just let us discuss our pay without retaliating against us. That was the dynamic at Goodyear. She was scared to talk about her pay. There was a strong culture of, you don't talk about your pay at Goodyear. And so nobody brought it up. And it wasn't until she got that anonymous note 20 years later that she learned that she was being paid unfairly for that long time. So the conversation in 2016 was very much, let us just discuss our pay, don't retaliate against us. And we saw states passing laws to provide that anti-retaliation protection. Now, almost 10 years later, we are in a dramatically different, having a very different conversation. And people have been emboldened by Lilly Ledbetter and by the great work she did around pay transparency to say, you know what, it shouldn't be on me to put my neck out there to have these conversations to try to figure out from all my colleagues how much they're being paid and whether I'm being paid fairly. It's on the employer to tell us from the beginning what our pay is. And so we're seeing states pass laws that require the pay range be put in the job announcement from the get-go. And so we have that light being shown. Sunlight is the best disinfectant, that really helping to make sure that employers are held accountable to do the right thing to begin with, so that we don't have all these Lilly Ledbetter stories being repeated all over the country. So Lilly was really important in shepherding that change.
It's interesting because we're also taught culturally it's not proper to discuss how much you make, and is a way to sort of suppress salaries, right? Because we're all shamed into not telling anything.
Definitely. We're seeing a real revolution, especially with Gen Z coming in, that there's just a greater expectation of transparency in life generally, especially around pay. And we're seeing Gen Z folks who are entering the workforce who are saying, I'm not going to even apply to a job if it doesn't include the pay range. Like, there's value assigned to employers now if they don't have that information, that they're trying to hide something or they're just not a good employer. And so we're really seeing that shift. And it's just, again, the intergenerational aspect. Fascinating to have watched Lilly be part of this. And she would spend so much time talking to the younger generations, going to schools, high schools, colleges, to talk with them, and really wanted to do, again, all she could to kind of plant a seed in somebody's head of like, this is not okay what you're dealing with, and you can do something about it.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Gloria, what do you think about pay transparency, and where do you think we're seeing that happen in conversations across the country today?
Yeah, well, certainly salary transparency is a step in the right direction, and the generational piece is key, obviously, because you want to feel that your potential employer is being fair and upright and being open, honest, and transparent. Because, when pay is kept secret, it basically reinforces inequities, right? It makes it harder for women, especially women of color, really to know their worth or advocate for fair pay. And when employers are very upfront about salary ranges, as you mentioned, during the hiring process, it helps to level the field, levels that playing field. And it really gives those potential employees a starting point to negotiate from, basically instead of, guessing or, relying on prior salary, which obviously may already reflect bias. And that negotiation point is really key. AUW has trained over 190,000 individuals in salary negotiation. And we hear again and again how, salary transparency can be transformative, and it can add to that negotiation process when people know that it's fair. So, today I feel like the conversation is shifting from, awareness, because so much education has been done at the federal and state level around, pay equity, but it really is about accountability. That employers do need to be held accountable for the laws that have been put in place, and they need to be implemented properly. But of course, seeing some backlash, right? The efforts to label equity initiatives as illegal diversity, equity, and inclusion. But I feel like we all feel the same way. Let's be clear, pay transparency, equal opportunity, and fairness, they really aren't radical ideas. They're just the foundation of a healthy workplace. And companies that commit to equity should actually be celebrated. They shouldn't be attacked. That's where we are now.
Absolutely. And Galen, what's your thoughts around that?
I have so many thoughts around sort of the weaponization of diversity, equity, and inclusion. And, Gloria's really right. These are bedrock American principles that are being attacked. And it's so important that we have ways to promote equal access to employment opportunities, and that we remember that diversity, equity, inclusion programs and initiatives are there to prevent discrimination from occurring and to remedy the effects of discrimination that has already occurred. And I think it's also important to be really specific about what we're talking about when we talk about DEI, right? Because, we keep hearing that DEI is illegal and immoral. But what is it, right? And so a anti-harassment training program, that is an example of a diversity, equity, and inclusion initiative. Ensuring that you are recruiting the best people from every community without regard to their gender or race. That is a DEI program. And also efforts to ensure that your pay practices are fair. That is also a DEI initiative. So that when we're attacking DEI, what we're saying is we want to push inequities under the rug. We want them to remain hidden and unaddressed. And that is really damaging to everybody, but in particular to women and people of color and people with disabilities in the workplace. So, we have countless examples now of how confusion about DEI has led to absurd results and also to really frightening results. And if you indulge me, I just want to give one concrete example. In one of his first actions in office, President Trump, in an effort to, eliminate DEI, withdrew a long-standing executive order that prevented federal contractors from using taxpayer dollars to discriminate against people based on their race, their national origin, religion, sex, sexual orientation, or gender identity. And as part of that effort, federal contractors were required to take affirmative steps to ensure that they were in compliance with anti-discrimination law. And that included affirmative steps to make sure that their pay practices did not include gender-based discrimination. And the Department of Labor, they had an enforcement office, they still do, that could proactively go out and make sure that employers were complying with the law. They didn't have to wait for someone to notice that they were being paid unfairly. They didn't have to wait for an individual complaint. They could go and make sure that these compensation systems were fair. Because of that, the Department of Labor over the last 10 years recovered $107 million for people who had experienced pay discrimination, the vast majority of which were people who experienced sex-based pay discrimination. That's huge, right? And those are people who did not know, going back to Andrea's point about, the importance of transparency. These folks did not know necessarily that they were being denied equal pay. It's because we have those tools built into the system, but no longer under President Trump's action, that is no longer, the Department of Labor is no longer able to do that. And so we see that this attack on DEI, or this effort to make DEI a boogeyman, is really just like a thinly veiled attempt to undermine civil rights enforcement, and also to help ensure that these disparities that occur on the lines of race and gender are left unaddressed, are left in the shadows. So it's really important that we all push back in the ways that we can, as citizens, employers, as people who are workers, as people who are participating in education, right? That we are pushing back on this concept that diversity, equity, and inclusion are somehow a threat to workers. In fact, it's quite the opposite.
Wow. I feel like they've hijacked DEI and said they've somehow associated to unqualified candidates, and that's not the reality. The reality is that if we break it down really simple, it's I want to expand the talent pool to hire the best possible person who's qualified and pay them the same as the other ones are getting paid for the same job. And I think they've managed to muddle the message by implying that we're hiring people that aren't qualified for roles that they are qualified for. You don't get to be an FAA controller without going to 10,000 hours of training, for example. There's lots of people in organizations that are working to lift up Lilly in an effective way to drive policy change after she lost her case in the Supreme Court, including the NWLC and the AAUW. How do we keep doing that given what you just described if the laws are not going to allow us to enforce these practices?
Well, I want to be clear that pay discrimination is still against the law, right? You may not discriminate against someone because of their gender, their race, their national origin, right? Their sexual orientation, their gender identity. It's still illegal. And I think that we have to be very clear about that all the time. But we have to continue to share stories. I'm going to go back to the storytelling piece. And that means that we have to create the conditions that allow people to be able to tell their story often and to lots of people. And I think that's what the National Women's Law Center, in the most basic way, lawyers are storytellers also. That is what we do. That is what AAUW does as well, right? And that make it possible for people to have their stories out in the public, to tell their stories to policymakers, whether that be federal policymakers or state policymakers, making sure that we are able to clearly identify the problem, the harm, and the solution. And we have people who contact the National Women's Law Center who have experienced pay discrimination, and we sometimes are able to help, or sometimes are able to find attorneys for people. But we have to make sure that we are creating those avenues and that we're not allowing these attacks to prevent us from articulating and working towards a vision of a future where there's economic security for everyone, including women, and where we have the ability to thrive and live in an equitable economy. We cannot let all of our energy be taken away by defensive work. We have to, we like to say at the National Women's Law Center, we have to block and build at the same time.
I love that. Jyoti, what do you hope Lilly will do to affect change? What steps can people take after seeing the film to help keep Lilly's work alive?
Oh, that's such a great question. And I was just listening to all the excellent conversation about, what got us to this point. One point I wanted to just sort of make, because I think sometimes people look at Lilly's story, or might just in general think about equal pay as sort of a woman's issue. And it's really not. I mean, we are all concerned about our livelihoods, right? I mean, that is the conversation at the moment, is about economic justice. And so women don't exist in a silo. They exist as part of communities. They exist as part of families. They are raising kids. They are supporting parents. They are, part of partnerships. And sometimes one partner loses their job, and you want to make sure that the other person is able to pick up the slack. All of those things that are important to people moving forward. So anyway, sorry, that was me ranting on a bit, but I do think it's really about us all being stronger together, as opposed to just, something that is something that women, are struggling with. But in terms of how we'd love to see the movie be used out in the world, I think, as Rachel said, people watch the movie and they're very, sort of emotionally gripped, and then sometimes they're even outraged. How could this just be going on just a few years ago, really? It felt so archaic in a way, that the circumstances that she endured at the Goodyear factory plant. We are hoping that once people watch the movie, that they continue, to sort of follow us on our socials and to kind of keep up to date, because just basically be in conversation with us as the film team, because what our goal is to lift up organizations like the National Women's Law Center, like AAUW. There's actually a coalition called Equal Pay Today, which is a coalition of 40 odd organizations that are all working in various ways to strengthen pay laws and to make it easier for workers to achieve fairness in the workplace day in and day out. We only hear about their achievements now and again, but they work day in and day out, and they're constantly lifting up and storytelling with people like Lilly. So our other goal would be to find that next generation, the modern day Lillys, who are out there, also everyday advocates who are out there, in their own ways, fighting for a particular circumstance in their workplace, or just a particular issue in their community. That's the power, I think, of film, is we do reach beyond political circles, we reach beyond legal circles, and once you touch someone's heart, as Rachel said, then you're able to help them figure out what to do with their head, and to take whatever small action that they can take, or big action if they would like, to move us all forward as a community. So we will have lots of information on our website and in our socials to try to help people connect those dots.
Very cool.
I'd like to jump in and say that the movie's going to open on May 9th.
Oh, yeah.
So there will be the opportunity for everyone in the country to go to the theater just in advance of Mother's Day. We hope it's going to be a wonderful Mother's Day opportunity to take your family to the movies on May 9th. And our website, if I can say, is lilymovie.com. And if you go to our website, you can join our newsletter and you can find out all about our events.
Lila, can you add that to the? Oh, she did. Okay, great. So, Jesse,
I was going to say, instead of roses, send her Lily.
I love that. So one small thing that I was thinking about is, like, post film, I'd probably be inspired to. Is it legal for me? I know it's legal for me. Is it required by my employer, if I went to him and said, hey, can you validate that I'm getting paid equally to my group based on the role I'm doing today? Is that something that's required for the employer to answer and address from a state legislation standpoint, or can they just avoid the question completely?
Yeah, I can start to answer that question. There are federal laws, as I think somebody put into the chat, the National Labor Relations Act, that make it so that you cannot be retaliated against for asking questions like that, for asking about your pay, for discussing pay. Those laws don't necessarily reach everybody. You need to be covered by the National Labor Relations Act. So this is it depends lawyer type answer here. But and then lots of states have passed laws making it so that it is illegal to retaliate against somebody for discussing their pay. So hopefully those would provide some protection, but not every state has that. And what we're again starting to see is more states look into passing laws that require that pay range to be provided at the front end to hopefully give you some more information about where you stand vis-a-vis some colleagues. And some states are going farther and saying that we need to have employers report their pay data or even kind of certify that they are paying people fairly. That is kind of the new cutting edge of equal pay law. That is not something that every state has. But a lot of this is also cultural change. And as you said before, there is still this culture, even if we have laws protecting us from retaliation for discussing our pay, there is still a strong culture of secrecy. And so I think it's really important for us to talk about how important it is to be transparent about pay, to be comfortable discussing pay. Because I remember Lilly saying to me when I was going with her state by state, if only I had known at the front end where I stood vis-a-vis my male counterparts who were being paid a lot more than me, I would have gone and talked to my employer about it and see, how could we fix this? I don't think she wanted to go to court. Nobody wants to go to court. That is a long, stressful, costly process. She just wanted to talk to her employer and make sure things could be done right at the beginning. And I do think a lot of employers do want to do the right thing. So, through storytelling, through culture change, and through legal change, we're really trying to kind of shift the conversation so that people can ask those questions safely and just have a conversation with employers to make sure they're being paid fairly to begin with.
Okay.
Yeah, and I would like to add that I think a lot of people who see Lilly this spring are really going to walk away with, as you mentioned, some questions, but they're also going to walk away being inspired. They're probably also going to walk away asking sort of what now? What can I do? And I think that as Galen, you mentioned, it's the storytelling. We just have to keep doing what made Lilly's story matter in the first place, right? Informing people of these laws. And her story became national because she had people like the Law Center and the AAUW behind her, not just cheering her on, but sort of helping translate her experience into policy and action. And that really is important at the community level to help people understand and give them knowledge about what these laws are and how they can impact their careers. That's really, really important. And so, change can happen, hopefully, when their lived experience, sort of meshes with that collective action. And, telling Lilly's story and elevating her voice and giving people the knowledge and information that they need can really help move forward all of these pay equity issues. And so, hopefully they will join the movement because, as we all know, there's a lot of work that still needs to get done. But hopefully we can continue to move it forward if we continue to do it together.
No, absolutely. So, Gloria, Lilly Ledbetter's Fair Pay Act was first signed in 2009, which I think it's amazing that it was so late. I mean, that's not that long ago. What legislation or bills should we be paying attention to today that makes sure the laws are protected for equal pay?
Yeah. So obviously the Fair Pay Act was that critical first step, but there's so much more that needs to happen in order to close the pay gap. And, we certainly need to pass the Paycheck Fairness Act, which we are excited that it's being reintroduced today, and it would modernize our equal pay laws and certainly ban the use of the things that we've talked about already, ban the use of salary history, protecting workers who discuss their pay, requiring employers to report pay data, because without that information, we don't know who's being fair and who's being unfair. And we really do need to support laws that address occupational segregation by ensuring equal pay for jobs that require similar skills, even if they're in different fields. So I think that's important. Obviously, the Salary Transparency Act would also require employers to paste pay ranges so that job seekers know what is fair before they even walk into an interview, and they're not having to guess whether or not they're going to be paid fairly. So those are really key acts that we hope are going to move towards the next step.
Yeah, I also think they need to define how pay is really calculated, because I've seen so many times where somebody says, well, that person has 20 years experience, you have 5 years. But if the job only requires 5 years experience, then that other 15 really shouldn't be a factor in like why you're getting paid more or less. And 20 things you did 20 years ago really don't have any relevance in today's skill sets. Galen, how might rolling back DEI impact fair wages or the wage gap?
Yeah, so, I already touched on this a little bit, but I also want to mention about DEI in the workplace, but it's not just the workplace. Obviously, there are efforts to roll back DEI in education as well. And that will have a tremendous impact on women of color in particular Black women. You can't educate your way out of the pay gap. I want to be clear about that. But for Black women in particular, Black women who have access and have higher education do earn more than Black women who don't have higher education. And so efforts to sort of stymie or limit opportunities in education really do translate into real money for women later in life. And so that clearly will undermine our ability to ensure that, women have access to certain types of jobs. Gloria mentioned occupational segregation, and that they can thrive. So there's the aspect of the tax on diversity, equity, and inclusion that impact workers directly, but then there are all these other things that impact your ability to earn a living and to live your best life, which is what we all want for people. The other thing that I'd like to mention here is that we have lots of programs. Just because Gloria mentioned occupational segregation, there are a lot of programs for people to create pathways for women in traditionally male-dominated fields. Those programs are under attack right now because they maybe potentially are falling under something that is categorized as illegal DEI. It's very unclear, going back to what I was saying before, what some of these executive orders are even describing as illegal DEI, but it has a chilling effect, one. And two, a lot of programs are being having their funding threatened because they might have equity-related grants. This is huge. There are programs that help women, prepare themselves to enter, for example, the skilled trades, construction, plumbing, areas where women have been underrepresented for a long time. These are sought after, high-paying jobs. And so when you pull those back, you're really cutting off opportunity for women to take on those careers. And that means occupational segregation is a huge part of the pay gap, right? The pay gap, the causes for the pay gap are complex and intersecting, but we know that occupational segregation plays a huge role. And so when you roll back these DEI initiatives, you are closing doors of opportunity for women and making it harder and harder to close that wage gap. The wage gap widened for the first time in 20 years just this past year. We can't afford to go backwards. We have to keep moving forward. But by rolling back DEI, we are threatening to go backwards in time. It's scary. And, you asked about legislation that we should be paying attention to. And I want to say that it's not just legislation that we should be paying attention to. We should be paying attention also to efforts to weaken enforcement of our civil rights laws. That will impact the ability for people to seek redress. Lilly Ledbetter's story is a story about pay transparency, but it is also a story about being robbed of redress, right? Not being able to enforce the law. And so these efforts that we have been seeing to roll back DEI, again, are efforts to roll back civil rights enforcement. We must be paying attention to that if we want to make any progress with respect to pay equity in this country.
Absolutely. In a Forbes article, Lilly was quoted as saying, "You need a strong faith and to never give up hope. I still have hope that maybe before the end of my life, we'll achieve equal pay." The wage gap may be more complex issues with many layers, but can you share one small step that us as leaders could do to help close the wage gap for the next generation? And so we're not still having this conversation 10 years from now.
I'm just going to jump in, not as a policymaker, but as a storyteller, in that what I've been hearing everybody talk about, there's, very different levels in our society and ways we can affect change. But I certainly hope that when people have an opportunity to watch Lilly and be inspired by her story, that they will then at least take the first step, which is to have a conversation with people around them. Because I think when we stop having conversations about the world that we want to live in, then we give up that power to be able to, that kind of feeds the groups that are actually working on legislative and more sustainable change. So anyway, that would be my one small step forward.
Okay, great.
Yeah, and I think that one small step that leaders can certainly take is really to make sure that you are being transparent with your team. Make sure that you are supporting their career development. Make sure that you are providing opportunities for them to advance, within your organization. Make sure that those who are in underrepresented groups are given opportunities, and just be committed to ensuring that everyone has the chance to make progress. That everyone has the chance to earn the wages that they should be getting. AAW has a very transparent compensation philosophy. And so implementing that transparency is really, really important. And, if you're going to be leading in working in the movement, you have to make sure that internally you are also being fair as well.
And I'll just say, on the emotional, psychological part of this, you really touched upon something just now by talking about Lilly's faith. And it was a long road to get the movie made, just like it was a long road to get the law changed. And at every juncture, when I would speak with Lilly or have an email from Lilly, she would always tell me that she had faith in me. And what we're all going through now is many, many steps backwards. And progress doesn't happen overnight. They're long journeys, and we must maintain hope, and we must continue to be inspired that we can make change. And so I hope that the film will remind people that we were once on a road toward betterment, and we will be again.
And I think, Rachel, the film will also remind us that we can make a difference if we try.
That's right. One person can make a difference. One brave, courageous person. And we can all be that person.
I'd like to build off that I think we can all be Lilly. And if we look at the state level and the local level, there's a lot of focus right now on the federal level and the tax against DEI and tax against a lot of things. At the state level and the local level, we have a chance in many places to keep moving forward, to keep advancing the ball. And that's sort of area of change that is often overlooked in policy conversations. So I want to encourage folks to look at their city councils, look at their state legislatures, get to know who their members are, and talk with them. I have seen time and again in my career at the Law Center, Lillys from different states come to me and say, I was wrong in this way. I want to fix it. I have a bill idea. Can you help me? And they go to their legislator, or maybe they've already gone to their legislator and then they come to me for some backup. But they just go to their legislator and say, this thing happened to me or to my friend. Can you fix it? Here's a bill idea. And that will get introduced. It's a much more accessible process through state and local legislatures than Congress. And I want people to know that and know the power they have to make change. And I think that is so important right now to push for change at the state and local level, to make sure we don't fall into kind of this despair and that we see the wins, we get some of these wins, and we keep working towards the society that we want, and that helps all of us. That is still possible in this moment. And yeah, just encourage people to look at the state and local level. We have a state playbook for gender justice that the Law Center puts out every other year that has lots of policy ideas that can work at the state level to either fill holes created in federal law, or go farther than federal law, because really the old trope about states are the laboratory of democracy, it is very much true. And we need to advocate strongly there.
Absolutely. All of you are so inspiring, and I'm hoping that the one thing that comes out of this is that everyone goes and watches the film, but then also reaches out to you all to share their stories, because I think the storytelling is the key to make change happen over the long term. And so Lila, if you could share everyone's links on how to connect with your organizations, I think that'd be amazing. Rachel and Jyoti, how can people see Lilly, and where do they go to follow the film and promote it?
Jyoti, I'll let you take that.
Okay, so let's start with, our official trailer drop is today, and you can find it at Lilly Movie and all on Instagram, on Facebook, on TikTok and YouTube. And we hope you will share that widely so that other people can enjoy it. You can go to our website, lilymovie.com. You can sign up for our newsletter, which we send out not too often, so don't worry about that, which will provide you with lots of updates in terms of how to watch Lilly and also how to take action. And we will be in theaters starting May 9th in select cities around the country. That also will be available on our website as well as on our social. So I just hope that you stay in conversation with us. That's really what we'd love for you to do, so that we can share what's happening with Lilly moving forward.
So tell them our hashtag one more time.
Our hashtag is Lilly Movie. Our website is Lilly Movie, LILLYMOVIE. And so are our socials. So it makes it really simple to remember.
I love that. I can tell you, I was at a conference last week and they previewed the film, and she's a movement maker, but the film definitely moved everybody in the audience. And
that's nice.
Yeah. So I'm excited for it to come out. Thank you, everyone. This was amazing.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone. It's so nice to be with everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Right, have a wonderful day.
You too.
You too.